Firstly, can you all hear me at the back? Take that as a yes. Welcome to the Woking Borough Council Planning Committee of the 1st of April. Before we start the main part of the Planning Committee, I just need to go through a few procedural matters. We're using a public address system, so hopefully everyone can hear everything that was said by myself and the other speakers. Please ensure your mobile phones are switched off or to silent. No fire drill planned. As you've probably noticed, Planning Committee procedure is filmed, and the full version will be available on the Council's website in a few days. Later, is it, Stuart?
Hopefully tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. The filming is of all those people that are speaking, not the audience. The Planning Committee is made up of 9 elected members, one of whom sent their apologies tonight, so there are 8 members of the Planning Committee present. And tonight we are advised by a variety of council officers on professional matters. On my far right is Mary Severin, who is the Borough Solicitor. She's here to give us legal advice. Next to her is Tricia Harcourt, who's the Senior Democratic Services Officer, and she's clerk to tonight's committee. On my immediate right is Tim Holton, who's the Vice Chairman of the committee. I'm Simon Weeks, I chair the committee. On my left is Claire Lawrence, who's Head of Development Management. And next to her is Chris Easton, who's Service Manager for Highways Development Management, to advise us on matters relating to transport and highways. And the rest of the members of the Planning Committee are sitting here on the left and right. Planning officers who are currently sitting over there will present each application. I will then call only those people who have pre-registered to speak, who have an opportunity to speak to the committee for 3 minutes. If you come up to the microphone on the table here, press the grey button, the red light here comes on, and then we can all hear what you're saying. And please ensure you get your key messages over in the 3 minutes. A couple of other points just to cover. The Planning Committee is a quasi-judicial committee, so as I say, we have set procedures and conduct. Would ask you to cooperate fully with that. Members of the committee are interested, for those that have registered to speak, in the quality of what you have to say, rather than necessarily the quantity. And obviously we would encourage you to stick to matters relating to planning. Following the planning officer's presentation, I'll call the speakers, and when those are concluded, the planning committee members will discuss and debate and raise questions relating to the planning applications, and then we'll either reach a decision that supports the officer's recommendation, or if alternative propositions are put forward, we will discuss those and decide whether we want to disagree with the officer's recommendation. Finally, just a reminder that as the local planning authority, our role is to determine valid planning applications using local and national planning policy. Our role is not to suggest alternatives, tweaks to planning applications, whether they're a good idea, whether they're needed, whether they're cost effective, whether the applicant is a good person. These are not matters related to planning. So with all of that preamble, it will go straight on to the planning committee. The first thing I'm going to ask is, clearly there's a reasonable number of people here tonight, so we will try potentially reorder the agenda to suit who we've got here. So firstly, could those who are here for the Willow Trees Works application please indicate? Right, okay, thank you. And those who are here for Bearwood Golf Course? I think we're going to need a recount. Okay, and finally those that are here for the Twyford application, Hurst Road. Well, I think on the basis of the show of hands, I think the equitable thing to do would be to leave the agenda exactly as it is. So that means, sadly, some of you will have a longer wait than others, but I'm sure you wouldn't want to rush any of the applications, just as you wouldn't want us to make a hurried decision on your applications. So the first application we're going to consider, just a couple of matters to cover. Minutes of the last meeting, we had 2 meetings in the last month. Members have got copies of those. Do you have any changes you wish to make to the minutes of those prior to these findings of true and accurate record? Bob?
Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't at the meeting, but a point of clarification. On page 11...
Which meeting are we referring to?
It's page 11, which is the 4th of March one.
Okay. Yep.
The officers confirmed that 3 disabled parking spaces will be provided in Rose Street immediately outside the Methodist Church. Is one of those going to be a drop-off? for like the cheap mobile bus, because as I say, I wasn't here and I would be.
I believe it was, Chris, do you recall that? Because obviously this was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we're looking at, it's subject to the traffic regulation laws that go to, but we were looking to speak with the president of the church to establish 2 parking spaces.
Thank you.
So just to remind members, this is about the accuracy of the minutes, not which we covered. So I see no one else indicating, so I'll sign the minutes as a true and accurate record. Thank you. Members, does any member of the committee have a declaration of interest on any of these applications which may lead to a conflict? Tim?
I need to declare an interest on the first item, which is the Allied Bakeries, as per the meeting of March 4th. So I shall be leaving the room.
Fine. And Claire, are there any of the items on the agenda that are to be deferred or withdrawn? No. In that case, Tim, I'll ask you to leave the meeting, and the rest of the committee will bear with me that I don't have a vice chairman to nudge me if I'm missing you when you're indicating to speak, so wave clearly. So we'll move straight on, as I say, to the first item, which is an item that was deferred for clarification following the last committee, which is the Allied Bakery site in Viscount Way, Woodley. And I made it very clear at the last meeting that we would be returning purely to discuss the aspects of that relate to the impact on adjoining commercial premises. Chris?
Sorry, Chairman, did you list the apologies for instance?
It's such a gentle reminder that I didn't.
Yeah.
It's right. Okay. I did mention that one member of the committee was absent. That's Councillor Kaiser was not present. Okay. So straight on to the former Allied Bakeries. As I say, we are only covering the issues that we decided on at the last meeting, which relates to the impact of these proposed houses on the adjoining 24-hour operating businesses, and those businesses' concerns that residents of the new dwelling will bring pressure on the goods vehicle operator licence issuing people to restrict their current operation, which of course is 24/7, being haulage companies. So straight over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. The application for Allied Bakeries, proposed erection of 68 dwellings. My presentation is going to consider 3 key areas. Firstly, as Simon mentions, firstly and principally, to provide more information on the goods vehicle licence process, which I'll be referring to as deferral, as that was the reason for deferral. Secondly, we will, as detailed in the members' update, briefly touch on 2 additional pieces of information provided by the applicant, which includes additional clauses in the 106, which has been designed to minimise the chance of complaints, and the additional survey work. And thirdly, I'd like to touch on the relevance of the inspector's approach, and I do emphasise the word approach in the impact decision, which is an adjoining site. Firstly, in relation to the goods vehicle operating licence, there are 3 adjoining businesses that can operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as there are no existing restrictions on the good volume. Traffic commissioners may review an operating centre where complaints are received, as I've detailed in my report. Any person who occupies land in the vicinity of the operating centre can complain about the noise and thus potentially trigger a review, not just potential residents occupying the development. So in effect, the operator already has some risk of review in the existing scenario, although it's acknowledged that this is increased as a result of the proposed development. I should mention at this point, I forgot to at the very start, we did receive quite a late representation from Mr. Cahill of the adjoining road haulage business. You'll see there's a barrister's letter in front of you. Effectively, this letter describes how the Traffic Commissioner has the ability to curtail or remove a licence, which we've already covered within the report. So just returning to considerations of the licence. On a review, as I've just said, the Traffic Commissioner has the power to remove an operating centre from the licence or attach or vary existing conditions, such as the type of vehicle to use the operating centre. I think the three key points I would like to make in relation to the process involved is, firstly, in terms of the Human Rights Act, which the Traffic Commissioner has to consider. An operator's licence is defined as personal property as part of the Act, and therefore the Traffic Commissioner has to consider this with respect to the operator in the review process. Secondly, before a Traffic Commissioner can impose conditions on an existing licence, he must first give the operator the opportunity to make representations on the effect those conditions will have on the business. They are then weighed up against the residents' concerns and a judgment is made. And the third and final point I'd like to make in relation to the process of the operating licence is that there is provision for further judicial scrutiny of any decision as the operator has a right of appeal to the Transport Tribunal. So that covers the first point and providing clarity on the process. Second point I'd like to cover is the additional submissions by the applicant. We have today received a variation to the 106. Whilst it's not possible to guarantee against future complaints, the developer has confirmed that prospective purchasers will be made fully aware of the haulage yard next door, lack of restrictions, and the on-site mitigation measures, and the responsibility to maintain these. So the plot sales contracts will include this info, so that purchasers are fully aware of this prior to buying the property. In addition to this, prospective purchasers and tenants will be made aware of this information. Again, so it will be additionally placed as a covenant on the deeds, so that it can be raised as an issue each time there is a change in ownership. As I say, both of these measures have been secured in the revised 106 agreement, and it's therefore considered that the chances of residents putting in complaints will be minimised as much as possible. I don't want to go into too much detail on the additional noise data, as that's covered in detail in the members' update. The applicant has submitted two further reports. The first is with the original acoustic consultant who've done a further 6 days monitoring, and also a peer review has been carried out by another consultant. And this has verified the accuracy and reliability of the original noise modelling. Lastly, in relation to the LIMPAC appeal decision, I'd like to draw this appeal decision to the attention of members. It is enclosed at the back of my report. Why it's significant is that there was a single residential commercial relationship to the site that we're considering here. In this application, concerns were raised from the adjoining business about the potential for future complaints regarding noise and the effect this may have on the viability of their business, which employs in excess of 300 people. So in this case, there was a risk of limitations being placed on the operation of the business as a result of complaints about the development, and that was in the sense of serving the noise abatement notice. Because the noise source is different, and we do acknowledge that, it's difficult to make direct comparisons. What is of interest is the approach that the inspector took in this particular appeal decision. The inspector based his decision on the evidence provided in the noise assessment and the council's assessment against its policies. So he didn't attach a great degree of weight on the possibility of future complaints. In other words, he did not object based on what may or may not happen in the future. The council's expert advice was that noise was not an issue, and the inspector agreed with this conclusion. This application before members, we feel, should be determined based on the same approach. It is considered that a refusal cannot be substantiated based on what may or may not happen in the future. Rather, a decision should be made based on the evidence provided in the noise assessment and the council's assessment of risk against its policies. Finally, in conclusion, whilst the concerns of adjoining businesses are noted, the key issues relevant to the determinant of this planning application are, firstly, the applicant has demonstrated that noise will not be a significant issue to justify refusal of the application. And this has been verified by the recent research work. And secondly, irrespective of this, we feel that a refusal could not be substantiated based on the potential for noise complaints at some stage in the future and the implications this may have on the adjoining businesses. As such, officers recommend conditional approval of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. So, members, I think we've been given quite clear guidance tonight that we have to be careful about speculating as to something that might happen in the future when considering a planning application. I'm very pleased to see that the Section 106 agreement has been modified today, and I think that's the penultimate paragraph on the first page of the members' update, that prospective purchasing tenants, including affordable housing tenants, will be made aware of the haulage yard and on-site mitigation measures. Information was placed on the deeds and plot sales contracts. A deed of variation, as we can see, has been signed today. So there will be no question of a developer perhaps conveniently forgetting to tell future purchasers that something is, could cause them some discomfort, particularly since this is going to run 24/7. So does any members wish to speak further? Bob and Lindsay. Right, okay. Bob, Lindsay, then the two persons. Bob.
I'm not sure this question should be addressed to David or to Mary, but the placing of a covenant on the land saying, or on the houses saying that, you know, you are aware of the noise, does that preclude them ever going to the traffic commissioner and saying that there is, we've got a problem, we want you to remove the goods licence? And then if that does, what liability does the council have in law for having granted the permission if the business goes under?
That bit's quite easy, we'll let Mary answer.
Okay. First of all, it isn't a covenant on the deeds. This is the developer covenanting to the council that they will inform, or any seller will inform prospective purchasers or tenants of the existence of the haulage site. That's number one. We can't be liable. Sorry, Bob, can you go through that again?
If I can remember what I said.
Sorry.
No, it's the, does that preclude
Right.
any residents going to the traffic commissioner saying, we can't live with this noise, even though we've been told about it, we can't live with it, we want you to take action against the haulage company? And then would the council be liable having granted the permission?
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. So the answer is no. The occupiers of the adjoining houses will not be precluded from going to the information commission. The goods vehicle commissioners. That clause does not stop them. It simply makes them aware that there is an adjoining site that may cause some nuisance. The traffic commissioners do not. The goods vehicle licence commissioners are not going to give conditions about whether you can complain or not. The only criteria is that they live adjacent to the site or they are affected by the noise. And so, because there is nothing to stop them, there is no liability on the council anyway, even if there was. Okay.
Okay. I think, Bob, just to supplement that a little bit, I think supplement what Mary said, if someone was to bring an action, I think that this would carry a significant weight in consideration of it, because I think that would weaken somebody's position. But obviously we're not in a position to judge what may happen in the future with the vehicle operator licence and the overall noise. Lindsay.
Yes, following from Bob's comment, have we got anywhere else in the country that's had a similar issue? i.e. we've coming in with a planned application now with a known business next door that's obviously 24/7 a week, and therefore have we any precedent of what they've done? And my second question is, what options are there other than refuse, defer or agree? Is there we can go to somewhere else? Because this is, I'm very, very concerned about passing something which then, because I'll make a comment that was said by the developers, okay, it raises the issue with the people buying the properties, but it doesn't stop them going to the Transport Commissioner. I'd be very concerned about putting something in place which then could affect a business. So I'm just trying to find out what routes we have available to us, and have we got another council in the country who's had a similar situation what they did?
We have a very similar situation, because that's the whole purpose of including the Lindpack appeal decision on an immediately adjacent site. So you could say it was very secret. We walked past the site that is being developed, houses that have been built on the old Lindpack site, when we went on our site visit to look at it. So we already do have evidence of almost identical set of circumstances, and we see that the planning inspector's decision on that was quite clear. And to answer your other question, do we have another option? As far as I'm concerned, we don't have another option. The role of the planning committee is to consider whether this is compliant with planning policy or whether it is
or something.
Mary, do you wish to add anything to that?
I was going to say that, in a way, this is your advice here from the legal department. We deal with, not me, but another legal officer who's an expert in goods vehicle licences. And also the fact that we've got this covenant now in the Section 106 agreement. In a sense, that's stronger than having a similar case, because similar cases always can be different in some subtle way that, we never really can rely. They're very rarely four square on our situation here. So I think the other thing is, I just want to say, you can't stop people complaining, unfortunately. So I think in a way you've got everything here to make your decision. And I do understand your concerns, but yeah.
Chris,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for what you did at the last meeting by adjourning the meeting and suggesting we had a deferral. At that point, I was quite happy to vote for the approval, because I think the mitigation against noise was sufficient. But since then, we have made progress with the problem with the Traffic Commissioner. And I don't think we can enforce this deed that's going to be put in to enable new owners to be aware of the situation. So I think thanks are due to the applicant who has agreed to put it in, because I think it's valuable and it does make progress. But as I say, it's technically, I think, shouldn't be part of our considerations, because I think the noise mitigation is sufficient, and I should certainly be approving the application.
Chris?
Thank you. I have concerns, because clearly there is a risk for the boilers here, and I just wonder what can be done in terms of, if you like, a contingency plan, and whether this is possible to have a condition within if it is approved, have a condition whereby we agree to work together to develop a contingency plan for them should they actually be space.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the evidence put before the committee this evening is that we know that officers and the professional advice that we've received is that there will not be a significant issue. A noise impact is not significant, or is not likely to be significant that causes a problem. I think that in the event that there are problems in the future, there are mechanisms available to the council in the legislation which can address that, and in particular the environmental and statutory nuisance legislation. I think members have to consider this application on the basis of the information put before them this evening, and the mitigation measures that proposal incorporates, including those additional mitigation measures that have been reported to members this evening around the Section 106 requirement and the deeds.
I'm still a bit uncomfortable with that because I think there's a degree of sensitivity which seems to be missing here. That potentially it is a difficult situation. Is there nothing that we can do to actually work together for that for the future?
I think, Chris, the problem is that we're straying well beyond the remit of the planning committee.
All right.
Rochelle?
Unfortunately, knowing you have to sign all the paperwork you have to have when you go to buy a property, I'm just wondering whether they'll actually see the covenant and actually understand what it means, and possibly offering them a time to come to the site in the evenings so they can see what the noise level would be. It might be a nice informative on there, not a requirement, but an informative.
Malcolm?
Do we know if there have been any complaints, because there are other houses all around anyway, do we know if there have been any complaints from the existing residences against that particular site in the past, and if so, what was the outcome?
My understanding there weren't, but I looked at David for clarifications as to whether they're not aware of any
I'm not aware of
complaints.
There may be, but I'm not aware.
Do bear in mind those houses are quite noticeably further away than these will be very close. But as we saw, there's significant acoustic measures. Right. Yes, very simple.
When someone buys a house, there's a little bit of a buyer beware situation. The other thing is that the solicitor should do a thing called a report on title, and if this is put to the solicitor's notice or the conveyancer, he should inform the purchaser of this. So, I haven't been on site, but I would imagine that the haulage site is not that invisible. No. So,
It's just that people can do this because I moved to an area where a school was, and I didn't happen to be there during school run, so I didn't realize it was quite as bad as it was. And so you understand these kind of things, that people will see this, and they'll see it during the day when there's obviously noise around there. In the evenings in Wokingham, we tend to be a little quieter, and suddenly having the beep, beep, beep coming out at 3 o'clock in the morning might disturb people's sleep.
Okay, I think all members have indicated want to speak and now spoken. Members are saying we're really only support that just to consider that. We've seen that there's the planning appeal decision on the impact, which is an adjacent site detailing similar circumstances. We've seen the correspondence from the operators of the haulage yards who are clearly concerned as to what this might have implications for in the future. We've seen that the applicant has come back at our, I guess, after further discussion and negotiation with us with a revised Section 106 agreement to draw these matters to their attention, to have a covenant to that effect. And I've also reminded you of the remit of the planning committee is quite clearly defined. So with those provisos, I'm going to put this to the vote. You have a very clear recommendation on this application to approve. Members, could you please indicate whether you wish to support approval? That's unanimous. Tim's on there. Could you call Tim back? So that application is approved. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the school application, which is an extension at Shenfield CME Junior School. We'll move swiftly on to that. Members, could I remind you that the reason the school application is here on the agenda? Sorry, we'll just wait for a quick shuffle of people. Right, members, just remind you that the reason this is on the agenda is not because it's contentious, but it's because in essence it's a planning application that's submitted by the council, and the local planning authority clearly forms part of the council. So in essence we're giving ourselves planning permission, and we need to be able to see that has appropriate scrutiny. However, I would also draw your attention, members, after we've heard what Ashley's going to tell us about the application, that there are no letters of complaint, no issues raised from the parish council. There's one letter of comment on it, and I would hope that we could probably keep discussion on this to a minimum, because we have a number of other quite big applications to consider tonight. Ashley.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members.
The application for the committee is the proposed direction of a new building containing 6 classrooms, SEN group room, library facilities and studio hall. The building also the scheme also secures additional play space and a significant enhancement to parking on the site. The site is located in Shinfield off Chestnut Crescent. Members will remember from before Christmas we had a scheme at Shinfield Infants, which is about 200 metres away, which was in similar circumstances. The members visited the site on Friday, and the school was a 1960s school, single storey in nature. As we can see, it's got one main school building and a playfield behind, and shoots up a cul-de-sac on the edge of the settlement area. The settlement boundary runs approximately down here. This slide shows an aerial photo of the site, again showing the development area and also the existing hard surfaces and playfields. This shows the proposed layout of the site. The building forms a single-storey wing coming off the southeast of the school. The hard play space is arranged into 3 multi-use games areas, and the car parking is located in the west of the site. The car parking is a total of 42 spaces, which is an increase in from the 17 spaces that currently exist on site. The total increase in pupil numbers increases from 240 pupils to 360 pupils, and staff increases by 11 from 32 to 43. The reason why this isn't proportional is because some of the classes aren't at full capacity yet, and so as the classes move through to 2 full forms of entry, that issue will be addressed. The slide also shows the additional play space at the rear of the site. Originally this was proposed to be one continuous play area, however due to ecological reasons and also potential flood risk, this area isn't to be culverted and will be a separate play area. This slide shows the existing temporary classroom which is to be removed. Members are on site where the building will be located. The building is of relatively standard construction with 6 classrooms facing directly out onto the play space. The building fits with the wider character of the school, with a similar scale. As members saw on Friday, the building is largely conspicuous from all directions, apart from maybe some glimpsed views from Millworth Lane, which isn't residential at that point. This slide shows the proposed floor plans, illustrating all the facilities previously detailed, the 6 classrooms clearly visible. And the parking arrangements are off the existing car park. There's some rationalisation of the existing car parking space and some additional landscaping there too. Again, the car parking won't be particularly conspicuous, just glimpsed views from Millworth Lane. The only issues to update members on are we still haven't had a response from the Environment Agency, who are under significant pressure. I spoke to them on the phone earlier on, and they're indicating that there's unlikely to be any objection. For that reason, it's recommended the application is delegated to the Head of Development Management to pick up that issue. Thank you.
Right, members, as I said, indicated this is a non-controversial application. Does anyone have any major areas of concern they wish to raise? Oh.
Yeah, it's not strictly within our remit, but the school hall and the library, could you get it a bit bigger on the screen, because I can't read what's in the documentation, I can't see what's up there.
I will try my best. Probably not, to be honest. Sorry?
There we go.
Is there, where it says library and hall, is there a wall across there?
I don't know the exact details of it. I suspect it's probably a partition wall that slides across, but I haven't been given the details of that.
Okay, it just seems strange to have a library that's in a hall.
I suppose possibly with the partition it gives more flexibility as how the space is used. Chris?
Right, thank you. Thank you, Simon. My question is on parking. I think if we look at the Shinfield planning officer's comment, that there are serious parking issues in the area, although with the junior and infant school. And I just wonder in total, if one looks at the parking in that area, it looks as if there's a significant increase in parking here on site. But how confident are we in terms of parking spaces in relation to similar schools or other schools of similar size?
In terms of this application, this parking on site is only for staff, and therefore off site it's going to continue in the same manner. Chestnut Crescent currently operates itself in a kind of informal one-way system, which was one of the considerations at the beginning, but that wasn't felt to be necessary, therefore it's being left as it is. But it does give the option for us to consider in the future. Parking surveys have been undertaken, which indicate there's about 68, I think it is, parking spaces available on street. We've had a conversation with traffic management that indicated there hasn't been any issues in relation to complaints from residents. The key part to this, though, is that the primary school at Shinfield Green, is currently being expanded as well. And therefore it's quite key because that's there's the nursery link to that, so there's the cross relationship between the linked trips between the two. So it's quite fundamental that the travel plan for each school coming forward with the two recent applications gives us the ability to do something greater and join the two together for linked trips of siblings from one to the other, and also with new developments that are coming forward in and around the adjoining area.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I'm going to take that straight to the vote in that case. As I say, nobody else indicated to speak. A very clear recommendation. Would you please indicate whether you're prepared to support the extension of Shinfield Senior Junior School? That is unanimous. Right, now come on to Willow Tree Works. We have a number of speakers registered for this application as well.
This is a full application for 38 dwellings, including 6 on-site affordable units, the remainder affordable, which has that 40% being secured through a contribution. Page 114 of your report deals with a summary of the contributions to be secured through Section 106. It's not quite an update because the recommendation is to defer delegate subject to the execution of 106. Hope to have it finished today. It's going to be finished early tomorrow morning. So it's winging its way back from Newcastle a bit at the moment, but everybody's agreed the terms of the legal agreement, so the final agreement will complete tomorrow. The site subdivides basically into settlement area and countryside. You can see from the red line there, the area to the north is countryside in the core structure. The land to the south, where the buildings are, is settlement area. You see it a bit better there with the red line, the buildings shown in dotted lines basically. So it's to the northeast of the village. The site at the moment is a former industrial site. It's actually now empty. When the application came in, it was actually occupied by Whitworth development. They've now moved to New Basingstoke, so the site is actually now vacant. The site's 2.6 hectares within the settlement. The proposed units are 38. The density based on the settlement alone is 28.6 dwellings per hectare. And the affordable units, as I said, 6 on site. The remainder is a contribution, adding up to 40%. First I'd like to highlight the policy relevant. Policy CP17 of the core strategy identifies Swallowfield as a limited development location where development should not generally exceed 25 dwellings. As the report makes clear, this isn't a maximum, it is what it says, it's generally 25. And the view taken in the report is in the absence of any harm, and I know this is controversial because the size of the audience. In the absence of any harm, the recommendation would be to approve this application. A number of things I want to draw your attention to: the availability of the site, the brownfield nature of the site, and so the absence of any particular harms associated with the development. There have obviously been a number of objections: scale, density, the character of the development in relation to the village, the sustainability of the development. Obviously, overwhelmingly, the issue has been matters of flooding and drainage. The application was deferred in December to allow the applicant to undertake hydraulic modelling. This has now been undertaken, and the council has engaged WSP to examine this. We have Martin Wheeler with us from WSP tonight, because obviously a lot of the questions are technical, and I have to do my best to answer them, and he's in a better position to do so. We've had confirmation of no objections from the Environment Agency and from Thames Water. That's in your update, which you would have received earlier. This was something that was of great concern. I believe that the objectors effectively don't trust the information that Thames Water published or the Environment Agency, but both have reconfirmed the position of no objections. I think the important thing as well, WSP accepts the findings of the hydraulic modelling and maintain that no objections be raised subject to conditions. And the relevant conditions for members are pages 23, conditions number 23 to 27 of the report, which deal with the various aspects of drainage. Just very quickly take you through some of the issues that have been raised. This is the proposal for 6 units fronting Swallowfield Street. There has been some concern that as goes out of keeping with the village. Officers don't agree with that. There are other examples of that form of development fronting Swallowfield Street. It's called Russell Cottages, just down to the south of the site. Very similar configuration relationship with the street. And in fact, less opportunity for landscaping than currently shown on this drawing. Example of very much an example of a street seen from the open space within the development. Again, we regard that as very much in keeping with the character of developments you will find around the village. As I've referred to on a few occasions, the development has attracted a number of objections, principally flooding and drainage. It looks at the principal development, scale, density and sustainability of the site. In terms of principle, the site is brownfield and vacant. Reuse for employment is unlikely to occur. The site is vacant. The applicant has tried to market the site for employment and without success. The course rate doesn't set a maximum number of units for development. Proposed dwellings are wholly within the settlement, the open spaces within the countryside. The access utilises existing access and hard standing, partly in the countryside, but nevertheless it is an existing situation. So there's a neutral situation arising there. The density is comparable, gives a reference to the SDLs, where that's 30 to 35 dwellings per hectare. Their developments are done on the edge of our existing settlements. The scale, the style of the units is comparable with local design and use of materials and features. In terms of sustainability, the course strategy accepts that housing development can occur in Swallowfield, generally 25 units, but it's not an absolute. It must be given to the comparative unsustainability of the existing use available of the land. It's brownfield land, it's on the edge of the village, and close to local facilities. And Section 106 mitigates and provides contributions for infrastructure and services. Flooding and drainage, the same has attracted most objections. You can see from the supplementary papers that there's been a continuing dialogue and a series of emails associated with this right up to yesterday. In response to the deferral, as I say, the applicant undertook hydrologic modelling. The council has taken advice from WSP. The Environment Agency has confirmed the site is in flood zone 1. There's no objections, and reaffirmed that it's the role of the council to determine the impact of pluvial flood risk. Thames Water believes that there will be betterment. WSP has confirmed that the approach taken by the developers is robust. There's no objections and recommends a series of conditions. 327. WSP has confirmed the recent material and maintains its position. So the recommendation is, as they are 6106 agreement, which provides for infrastructure contributions off-site football area. So it should say construction of the local footpath improvements, and it is anticipated that the 6106 will be completed very early tomorrow morning. So the recommendation is as per the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. What's your updates, Claire, on this?
Chairman, I just like to clarify the recommendation. The recommendation is subject to the additional changes on the update sheet, in particular additional highway comment, conditions and informatives. I'd just also like to draw members' attention to that late correspondence that has been received. The local flood risk resilience group has actually procured a consultant to look into the information that has been submitted to support the proposal in flood risk terms, and has provided a critique, if you like, to address that additional information. This, as Chris indicated, this has been considered by WSP, and in particular, I think there was a concern that we asked WSP to look into that the other consultant has raised issues that they felt were not fully addressed in the flood risk information submitted to support the application. WSP have reviewed that letter and have categorically stated that they still feel that the drainage information and the flood risk issues are addressed through the development. The primary reason for this, and that we do have a representative from WSP here, if there are any detailed questions, but primarily because they have further information and they have been subject to and party to a range of different meetings with the applicant to thrash out a number of issues, and that has informed their decision process. In the absence of that, of having that information available, the consultant employed secured on behalf of the residents has not been party to that additional information, and consequently has not has made a recommendation on the basis of the information before him, which is actually not as full as the county's consultant has been party to. So I think there are different circumstances. If there are specific questions, as I say, there is a flood risk engineer expert here for members to ask questions.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Right, we'll now go on to the several people registered to speak. Firstly, Swallowfield Parish Council. John Anderson? Anderson, sorry.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So just to be clear, so I see, so the resilience group is speaking.
Okay. Hopefully that's all right. Mr. Chairman and members, the Parish Council does not object in principle to residential development on this site, and we have lent over backwards to be constructed and to engage. However, these attempts have not really been reciprocated, with the result that the plans have been changed very little, and given the issues, it is impossible for us to support the application in its present form. First, the Parish Council puts its weight behind the flood resilience group and the serious issues that they have raised. The group has put an enormous amount of effort in and has shown themselves to be highly credible. Facts that shouldn't be taken lightly. It reflects the serious concerns and fears that we all have about the harm that will be caused. We have heard that an expert consultant has highlighted shortcomings, and the impact of the sewage discharge volumes and rates is based on questionable assumptions. I ask, why base this decision, which could severely affect people's lives and well-being, on theoretical models and assumptions when there is real-life data and evidence that can be used to calibrate events? Best advice on both of these counts is surely to err on the side of caution. In a sensitive location, this means applying even greater rigor to the analysis and building far more capacity and redundancy into the design of the necessary flood defences. It's absolutely vital that is done. However, these critical issues have overshadowed others that are extremely important but have been brushed aside. Housing density is far too high. Density is, in this case, a perfectly good guide. We only have houses, not flats and maisonettes. So why bother to stipulate such a guidance if that guideline is simply to be ignored? Density is in line with the borough. Density in line with the borough's guidelines will be much more in keeping with the rest of the village, and it would also open up opportunities for better flood defence. And it would reduce highways impact to some extent. Furthermore, the parish council would far prefer to see a commuted sum to enable the borough or parish council to maintain the infrastructure and open space. We've suffered badly at the hands of developers that have in effect abandoned responsibility for infrastructure in the past, leaving it to be picked up by others when it fails. Finally, new schemes are supposed to integrate into the existing community. Having the residents of the development pay for the maintenance through a management company as proposed will promote an us and them divide. This problem is worsened by the isolated feel to this development given the cul-de-sac nature of it and the single access at the outermost extremity of the village. Just add a pair of gates and you have created a gated community as an annex. The reality is that the developer has made no meaningful concessions to address the concerns of the local community or even to meet them halfway. The application fails to take into account known real-life flood events and pays scant regard to preserving many essential characteristics of the village. The Parish Council trusts that the committee will relieve the deeply felt concerns of local people who honestly believe that this development will do irrevocable harm to them and to the social and natural fabric of the village. As councillors, I think we all have a responsibility to safeguard our residents and the neighbourhood from the never-ending developments of this type. That present the very real possibility of going significant harm. For that reason, above all else, Swallowfield Parish Council objects.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask Lee Atkins from the Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Lee Atkins, Chair of the Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group. The group was formed after the devastating floods of July 2007 and earlier flood events, which affected much of the parish. The group accounts for some 244 years of experience of living in the parish of Swallowfield. SFRG are not opposed to a measured, resilient redevelopment of the existing site into residential use. We've been very clear on this point throughout. We remain strongly opposed, however, to the plans as submitted. These proposals have caused real fear among many residents throughout the parish, and there are legitimate concerns which, as yet, the applicant has failed to satisfy or in many cases respond to at all. Railway's flood risk assessments and hydrological models purport that the existing flood situation experienced around the site will be no worse. We disagree with this statement wholeheartedly. I would like to remind the committee of some facts, hard facts from residents who've lived in the parish for many years, many of whom themselves have been flooded. In the 2007 event, 5 homes on the boundary of this site flooded, including many gardens. Several other properties were perilously close to being flooded with water at their thresholds. This is a significant number. The developer is actually raising the southern boundary of the site by over 1 metre to ensure that the site itself actually drains. This is at the expense of boundary properties. The developer is proposing to culvert an existing large open ditch at the front of the site. This is contrary to WBC and EA policy. The developer is making widespread use of filter drains. Other councils, in their planning advice, suggest these features should be used as an absolute last resort. Yet here, in an area with high risk of flooding, they seem to be an integral first resort method of perimeter drainage. For those of you with an environmental interest, the River Blackwater is practically adjacent to this site. It's a failing watercourse with substandard water quality under the Water Framework Directive. This development puts this failing main river at further environmental risk. Swallowfield sewage pumping station cannot cope. Raw sewage discharges from the manhole closest to this site. The applicant insists yet that this is a matter for Thames Water to resolve, yet they are intending to sell homes connected to a failing infrastructure, knowing full well what will happen. This is not the behaviour of a responsible house builder. At least 15 of the 38 proposed homes have finished floor levels at or below observed flood heights. This is some 40% of the houses that you're being asked to opine on. This is not a good design legacy. Our own specialist flood risk consultancy has reviewed the applicant's models and raised a number of concerns, as you've heard. As of last night, WSP are still replying. This is too late for a proper consultation. Bellway's brochure issued to members is misleading. Consultation process has been highly unsatisfactory, and we can see no substantive changes whatsoever to the first draft plans issued by the applicant in 2013. SFRD have tabled 2 alternative proposals to the site layout. These have been ignored. Flooding causes real harm to communities. I've lived through the economic and psychological trauma of being flooded myself, as have many other residents. Our residents are justly concerned and feel real fear and harm as a result of these proposals. And we look to you, not only from a planning perspective, but as lead local flood authority.
You must summarise now, please.
We're looking to you to make a decision which takes absolute cognizance of all of the comments raised. This has been absolutely rolled over.
All right. Thank you very much. Could I now call upon James McConnell and Ryan Saul from the applicants to speak to us?
Good evening, I'm James McConnell and I'm a Planning Director with Bellway Homes. Bellway has worked hard to bring to members a high quality development that is compliant with local and national planning policy and with members' support will deliver much needed housing on a brownfield site. We've produced bespoke housing designs that we believe will both support and enhance the character of the village. All units meet the Council's design guidelines with regard to back garden depths, distances between dwellings and internal space standards. We comply with the Council's parking standards. We've proposed a wide range of housing types, including affordable housing, to provide good housing opportunities within the village. We've proposed a comprehensive landscaping scheme with significant tree planting that will enhance the landscape quality of the village. We do recognise the significance of public participation in planning, and we have consulted the village over our proposals, and the quality of our house designs received positive feedback at our pre-application community exhibition. We have met with the parish on a number of occasions, and we haven't ignored what they've said. We've also received feedback regarding flood risk and foul water discharge in the village, and I want to ensure you that we recognise the fear of residents and that we've dealt with these matters comprehensively, with the Flood Resilience Group having a significant input into the consideration of these issues. I'm pleased to confirm that Condition 29 requires Bellway to establish a project community liaison group which will ensure the continued involvement of the local community throughout the construction programme, should members resolve to grant planning permission this evening.
Good evening, my name is Ryan Saul. I'm Associate Director at Odyssey Marquides, and I hold over 13 years experience as a civil engineering consultant. Odyssey Marquides has been appointed by Bellway Homes to undertake a flood risk assessment for the development. The surface water drainage strategy comprises of a sustainable drainage system including a pond, permeable paving, swales and filter drains, providing significant attenuation and flow reduction versus the existing drainage system. A detailed hydraulic model has been completed to assess the impact of the development on overland flows. The results show that development will not increase flood risk off-site during the lifetime of the development. WSP, acting on behalf of Woburn Council as specialist consultants, approved these findings. RPS has undertaken a detailed fluvial model of the River Loddon and Blackwater, which demonstrates that the site is located in flood zone 1 outside of the fluvial floodplain. The fluvial modelling was subsequently approved by the EA. The change of use from commercial to residential use, along with removing surface water connections, will result in a reduced peak foul flow into the Thames Water network. This has been approved by Thames Water. In summary, I am satisfied that the proposed development does not increase flood risk and reduces both surface and foul water flows. My views are consistent with the findings of WSP, the EA, Thames Water, all of which raise no objection to the development, and the proposals comply with National Planning Policy Framework.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, and Stuart, would you like to speak as ward member?
Good evening, Chairman, Committee. I think you've heard from the residents of Swaterfield, which you really do. And I think, I won't go recapping the detail of everything you've heard, and you've heard both sides from the applicant and as well as from our residents. I think the three issues remain are one, the density of housing, why we have to have 50% more than the required number, which again has an effect on the flooding. The sewage capacity, already Thames Water has said that the sewage capacity in Swaterfield is inadequate, so adding another 38 houses to it is not going to have that much. And I think the third and most important thing is flooding, because this is the bit that you've heard raises the fear in people, the harm that it does. You know? And as the EA have given the responsibility to us locally to decide, that I want to be absolutely sure that we are really, really, really sure that this is not going to make things worse. Because I can just imagine in the future a whole load of people walking around looking at us and saying, well, we told you, and I have to flooded. So I'll leave it to you, and please consider the items that you've had. And some of the photographs, please have a look at.
Thank you, Stuart. Right, that concludes those people registered to speak on this item. We have, just for the benefit of the residents here on this one, members of the planning committee attended a site visit, I think it was just before Christmas, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah, it was just before Christmas. And so we are familiar with the site, and we saw the ditches at the rear of the site, the part of the site that extends into the countryside. We also obviously saw a number of residents who had concerns about pre-existing issues with regarding flooding and sewage treatment. So, who wishes to speak? Bob first.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first one I want to take issue with is the statement that it meets the council's parking standards. It doesn't, and provides 6, according to what I can see here, 6 spaces. The rest is free-for-all parking, so it's not actually a strictly accurate statement. Now, obviously I'm going to go to flooding now. On the modelling that WSP did with all their extra information, did they do anything with the worst case scenario? A what if a drain got blocked, or what if this happened? Because that is the approach we should take according to the National Planning Policy Framework as a precautionary approach.
Yes, I think. Sorry, if we just first we just have the question on parking first, please.
Bob, would you mind pointing out the 6 you're referring to? There's more than 6.
This is right, I've got them on the right page. Page 124. Consultation. Please turn them on the right side.
On the right side. Only 6 spaces.
It's for the affordable housing to the front of the site. There's 2 parking courts. So there's 6 units in total, and there's 11 spaces. So there's 6 that there's 1 allocated for each unit, and then the rest are unallocated, which is allowed in accordance with our parking standards because it gives it greater use. Not everybody may have a car, therefore they have 1 allocated each for the affordable, and the remaining 5 are unallocated.
They've got a car and swallow them, are they going to get anywhere?
The standard applies across the barrel.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just 6 for 38 houses?
No. It's only for the affordable units at the front of the site.
What does it say there?
There's 6 affordable houses at the front.
So 6 affordable houses at the front, there's 1 space allocated each, and then there's 5 unallocated spaces.
So there are 11 spaces for 6 affordable houses.
So why has Swallowfield Council said it doesn't satisfy the council's provision for the 32?
I don't know. But in terms of the rest of the site, the provision is There's two, for the remaining 32 private units within the site, there are 2 spaces each other than plot 18, which has 1 and a garage. However, there's the level of unallocated parking, the visitor parking across the site is slightly down. However, the width of the road, the 5.5 metre road running along the site, there is sufficient room in the private site to accommodate additional visitors or unallocated need be. But each unit has 2, many driveways have 3 or 4 spaces on them, and they all have garages as well. So we're happy.
So the question, which I think we'd probably appreciate your input on, is the issue that was raised about the worst case scenario in the event of something blocking.
To say that then there's Martin Wheeler.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I can confirm that one of the main, the W will explain.
It might be easier there then.
Okay.
Press the red button.
Okay. Yes, I can certainly confirm that WSB took a copy of the model and therefore they've done an awful lot more runs than is evident on the examples that you've seen produced in the various papers by the developer. Certainly, yes, there is a run without pipe work there. So there's a run with no pipe work, and that again shows that there is no significant change in the levels before and afterwards. The important point to make is that we're not showing there's no flooding, because obviously there's been a lot of existing flooding. We can't eliminate existing flooding in the area. The thing that modelling does show, and robustly shows through a lot of different examples that we've tested, that the development makes no change to the existing situation.
Can I just come back on that? You've partially answered my question. Sorry, you've partially answered my question, but I'm not sure that you answered the point about if the drains were blocked, if the foul water runaways were blocked. I'm particularly sensitive on flooding because my ward was particularly underwater last year, and it was not a pleasant experience for anyone. So I can really sympathise with the residents if they're worried about it. And I also need assurance on the sewerage, which is not up to standard according to the EA.
I think I made the point, yes, we have done a run without drainage system in place, so that again shows no change. So that's the worst case scenario we talked about. On the foul issue, that's not something that WSB were asked to look at until today, I think. I have looked at all the various calculations done by 3 different parties, and there are issues with all of them probably. It is certainly a case that there are planning conditions in place, so the council have the opportunity to review in consultation with the sewage undertaker, Thames Water, and it's their responsibility, as you know, to deliver and maintain and operate the system. I know they do an impact study, or I believe they did an impact study a while ago, which showed some upgrade is necessary. They're currently saying that because the surface water is disconnected from the system, that compensates for the slight foul increase. But as I said, there is a planning condition, so the detailed design has to be reviewed and agreed with the council and in consultation with Thames Water. So I can look at that further with Val, but there's plenty of opportunity to.
Just think one thing I just need to remind the committee. Our role is to consider the planning application. Our role is not to address any pre-existing issues. And I think we must be careful that we don't confuse the two. Our role is to, if we were to consider this application favourably, that will be because we've been convinced by the various reports that the situation that currently exists, both in terms of flooding and of issues with the Thames Water's sewage system, which we've had clear evidence of, our role is to make sure that it doesn't worsen it or exacerbate it. That may not be a popular thing to say, but that's the factual position we have it. Just as when people say the road's already horrendously busy, well, in that case, it's already busy before a development that people are considering. So we just need to bear in mind the things that we're here to address, and that is whether this application and whether the measures proposed, and we've had reports on, contradictory reports, I would hasten to add, from the Flood Resilience Group and their consultants, and WBC and their consultants WSP. So our role is just to consider that aspect of it, not pre-existing problems.
Your point is well made, but as you said, we don't need to exacerbate the problems, and you've also pointed out the fact that there are different results and different interpretations coming out, and I would actually probably side with people who actually live in the area.
Lindsay, next.
Thank you. Taking your comments, Simon, I'm not convinced at the moment that the information that we've got or things. First question is this an on-balance recommendation? Secondly, regarding CP17 and the maximum of 25 properties in Swallowfield, a 50% increase, which is what 38 is over 25, sounds quite a lot. I'm concerned that's driving a horse and cart through CP17, so I would like to have an explanation as to why 38 is considered. But as my thing is, why 38 is considered acceptable. I might accept 26, 27, maybe 28 is acceptable, but I wouldn't accept 38 as such. And also, when we had the presentation from Mr. Atkins, he raised two interesting issues. One was the impact on the failing river, and I think we do need to be, from environmental issues, if we have a river that's failing, we've got to do everything we can to ensure that it stays and performs its function. And I would like a technical answer that I fully understand as to filter drains. I don't know exactly what filter drains is. I could have an idea what they are, but I'd like to understand why they are considered a last resort and why they are being proposed in this instance.
Who's going to take that?
Well, certainly filter drains are a recognised form of sites, and they're not a last resort. They're commonly called trench drains, French drains, depending whether they're on highway. They're a recognised form of drainage in that they allow the water to percolate down and collect in a perforated pipe, which takes the water away. So it's certainly a recognised form of sites.
Okay, could you comment on the issue about the Blackwater River being a failing river? What's a term I've heard before?
I presume this one's drying up.
This is to do with foul again. The only issue would be if there was foul sewage flooding. And it's up to Thames Water to design a system with help from the developer with contributions to make sure that doesn't happen. They suggested a solution. I know the residents have suggested a solution as well, which wouldn't be sensible to have 3 days of storage on site. A, because in warm weather that causes septicity, which causes hydrogen sulfide and corrosion in systems. And B, lots of flat valves into the raw sewage is not a good idea. So Thames Water's solution that they propose would make more sense. It may be that when they review the detailed design stage, they decide to upgrade the pumps, but they will have money available through the developers to be able to do that.
Sorry, so for us to make a decision, we haven't got an agreed position on how to deal with this issue at the moment. It's an either or, and they're still looking at it. Is that right?
An outline design has been carried out, and there's a planning condition in place which will allow detailed design. It has to be agreed with Thames Water. The planning authority in consultation with the sewage undertaker to
When you finish, can you turn on? Is it normal practice to have the position that you've got rather than a final solution, that's one word, a completed option available rather than still investigating what the best might be when we're looking at this situation at the moment?
Absolutely, but that's what the planning condition is there for. Often there will be no detailed design at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Could you comment on the CP17 and the proposal?
Thank you, Chairman. If I may just clarify a couple of points from a planning perspective on the issue. Technically, that Thames Water could deal with the sewage issues, and that's why a condition is considered to be acceptable. It is Thames Water's responsibility I can advise members that if they refuse this planning application on the basis that they were concerned that the sewerage was not sufficient, that would not stand up and be able to substantiate that refusal if it was challenged. Because simply it is not our responsibility, it is Thames Water's responsibility. So that's the first issue. Secondly, we've talked about the difference in terms of the advice that has been submitted. I mentioned as part of Chris's introduction, I clarified that we have received different information. This council has employed WSP as ex-expert. WSP has received further information. They have done more work. They have been party to further information in terms of flood risk than either the flood risk resilience group have been, or also the consultant employed by them to look into this. So I think in terms of the weight that we must place on that evidence, we must place it on that has received the most input from technical information to enable them to substantiate their position, and that is WSP's advice. In the event that we end up in a refusal on drainage grounds, we as a council need to put forward evidence of real and significant harm if we are able to substantiate that refusal. The advisor that the council uses for all of its flood risk issues, WSP, is telling us as lay people around drainage that they cannot substantiate that refusal that the scheme is acceptable. So I would again put that before members before they consider this proposal. In terms of the number of units, yes, there is a recommendation, or there is a policy in the core strategy, and that talks about a number of units that's acceptable within certain developments that are categorised. I think the key thing really in terms of this is that the reason for that is one of sustainability. It's about the type of facilities that a village has got, about being able to be self-sufficient, if you like. And that ties in with other things like the economy movement and so on around sustainability. I think that in this instance, I mean, that's what the policy is there for, but as we know, policy is there for a reason, and one of the key things that we need to demonstrate is that there is a significant harm not associated with complying with that policy. We've talked about all the site-specific issues around, garden sizes, around parking and all the other things. It doesn't meet our standards. So on site, it's difficult in officers' view to substantiate harm associated with the greater number of units on the site. Tying it back to the principle, though, is that the greater number of units has got to be balanced against the other benefits of the scheme in terms of bringing back a green brownfield use into brownfield use into another alternative use, and the sustainability issues associated with having employment use there versus a greater number of residential uses than the core strategy indicates. And on balance, and it is an on-balance decision, we feel that it is clear, balancing all those issues, that there is not a reason that could be justified to refuse this application. So hopefully that provides some certainty. I don't feel, and we've had examples of other schemes that members have refused because it's over the allocation which has been identified, and those have been unsuccessful as harm can not be substantiated, and in my opinion it will be very similar here.
Members, some of you may remember the Manor application in Shinfield where it was designated for 100. An application came in for 128 and we felt that was a step too far. Unfortunately, we refused it and the planning inspector disagreed with us and allowed it, said that it was reasonable. But I take Lindsay's point that this is not 28% over, this is 50% over the guideline, but we've heard what the officers have to say on that. Rochelle, next.
I'm a little bit troubled by the fact that WSP has gotten more information than the Swallowfield Resiliency Group on flooding. If there was additional information that their expert hadn't gotten, they might be able to come up with suggestions, or at least the fact that we've given one group who's already produced a report, is paid for by WBC, to do this. I think I'm a little bit troubled by that. The second problem is the inconsistency of Thames Water. If they're saying the Swallowfield system is inadequate at this point, and they're saying there's no objection to this, do they actually say there's no objection, or do they just not do anything? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that, do they say, no, well, this is fine, but if it's fine, why is the rest of it not fine? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
All right, I'll just pick up on the Thames
Just no comment.
The Thames comments from page 127.
Yeah.
In essence, they're saying, Thames Water is saying they don't object because there are proposals that they're going to introduce to address this. That's my understanding of what they're saying. But we don't actually, they're not saying there's nothing going to be done. They're saying something's going to be done, but that's
By
something
them,
technical,
not
but
by
they're
us.
going to, not by us.
Okay.
And in terms of the availability of information, would it be possible to have a comment on that there? The fact that the technical information that's WSP had is different from that from what that was in next week?
Can I just also, before I just talk about that point, can I just refer members to the update sheet as well? There are additional comments from Thames Water in there. And what that actually states is that the existing flows are in the region of X. I mean, I don't need to explain the technical detail, but the last comment is therefore there is betterment. So I think that makes it very clear that not only are they not objecting, they're saying that the scheme is its betterment over and above the existing situation.
So this is the email dated the 23rd of March.
That's right. I think, and well, it's Martin, isn't it? Yes, maybe you can, I'm just going to explain it as I see it, but if you tell me I'm incorrect, then please tell me I'm incorrect. But my understanding is it's not the information necessarily just submitted by the applicant, it's about the modelling and background information that's available to WSP as our more strategic drainage expert and advisor. Is that correct?
This is in relation to surface water.
That's
yes.
right.
Yes, we've been using for a long time now the model, and able to do all the runs and interrogate what's in the model, the ground model, to satisfy ourselves that it's robust and work. Obviously, the main point in the summary of the group is that the summary is that he hasn't been able to assess it because he hasn't got the information. So on that basis, he says he can't recommend approval, but then he hasn't examined the data, so he obviously can't.
I might feel more comfortable deferring it and allowing their expert to actually evaluate this, the information, to share it with them, to share the information with them, so they can actually make a
Michelle,
about
can
it.
you go through the chair, please? Otherwise we'll descend into... Right, sorry, just a minute. So would you now like to make your point properly?
Sorry. Just wondered if they could possibly share this information with the Swallowfield Resiliency Group, so they can also make their own information and make their own decisions.
But it's actually not our information to share.
It's the applicant's.
It's the applicant's information.
Could the applicant share it with the Swallowfield Resiliency Group? Just to make sure it's better, you know, so the local group knows what's going on.
Can I just clarify a couple of points if I may, Chairman? First of all, my understanding is that a lot of that information is based upon the model that WSP have party to, and that's been informed by other information that they've been party to, because they've been providing that advice to the council for quite a considerable period of time on a strategic basis. Is that correct?
That's a fair summary, yes.
So, this is fundamental information that our advisors have. It's the same. Can I just maybe compare it to a slightly different situation, but I think it'll help members make that comparison. We talk a lot about modelling around transport, and what we say is that we, as a council, with WSP, have produced a model that is there, informed by our particular local circumstances, all the nuances, all the inputs of further information that we've got. And then we get developers who do a transport model. And what we do is we test those assumptions in their transport model against ours, because actually ours has got more information in it because it's been built up over time, it's more strategic and so on. That's the same example of what we've got here. The developers put forward a proposal. We've tested that proposal. We've run lots of different scenarios and lots of different parts of the model to see whether or not that scenario actually works. And what our model is saying is that yes, it does work. What the developers, the flood resilience group is saying is that no, it doesn't. But in actual fact, our modelling is more reliable because it's informed by more information, which is a part and parcel of our model. So that's how it works.
Chris?
Thank you. I had questions on parking and flooding, which have largely been covered, but just one thing I'd like to raise, and that is the question of this filter drainage. I'm not a drainage expert, obviously, but from the way you described it, what is the life of a French drain or this filter drainage before it clogs up and has to be dug up?
It will have manholes that, like any pipe system, you have manholes in the system, so you can inject and clean the system. So there's no reason why its life should be any shorter than another drainage system, piped drainage system.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, obviously the photographs have reached myself, but I think all members are in agreement the area does flood. But what we're deciding on is whether this application is going to make the situation worse. And we have heard categorically from our expert there, from WSP, that it isn't a problem. So if we turn this down and went to appeal, and our own expert says there isn't a problem, I'd be struggling. I would be struggling. My second question is, I didn't quite understand this about the affordable housing, because this was just on the update, that it seems to have been reduced to 25% because it's on a brownfield site and they're vacant buildings. And I just wondered, at what point were they vacant? Is it today? Was it a year ago or 2 years ago? Thank you.
The vacant property situation is something fairly new, actually, and the council will have to develop a policy on this. Basically, it's an allowance for, it's really to encourage sites to come back into use, either through reuse of the buildings or through redevelopment. So it's a government initiative that's been introduced. We've had to build into the Section 106 effectively that once the council has a policy on this, that we will have to make allowance for it. But at the moment, we do not have a policy. But it's recognised in national guidance that this is something we will have to do. It was a fairly late entry into this determinations application. Nevertheless, it is effectively now enshrined in national planning policy. And so we will actually have to look at this. And this will apply to not just this application, but to all other applications where there are vacant properties. As to when it becomes vacant, there is no national statement on that. So when this was raised by the applicant, we did start to look round for examples, and in fact, in truth, we were getting lots of different messages from different councils how it's interpreted. It will be up to us. So Honorary Public Policy has been alerted to this being an issue, basically because we do not have a policy. So the reason that legal agreement is worded in that way is to allow for the future. That's basically the basis of it. I mean, obviously, you will find in the national press and public and councils are getting very concerned about this as a piece of legislation because it potentially eats into the affordable housing contributions that are being secured through development. Nevertheless,
thank you.
All right, thank you. We're, by the time we're going to see more of this from the board. So
can I come back?
So I'm going to take Chris because he hasn't spoken first. Thank you.
Thank you. I support what Tim said. I think we've had trouble with flooding before as members. If you're considering overdevelopment or a building that's overlooking another, visual things like that, we can go on site visits, we can have a look and we can see whether we agree or not. This is a high technical matter, flooding. I think we had some discussion on the application in London Road in Ruscombe. The fact is, it's more or less impossible for us to argue against the evidence that we have because it's so technical. What can we say? You may have an inkling that something wrong with it. You may have an inkling that what the objectors have put forward has merit in it. But we are not experts, and I don't see how we can really use that as a reason for refusal.
Okay. Lindsay?
Thank you. I think the use of analogies here Claire used. I think there's a similar analogy here. If you take opinion, you go to a doctor. I think what we've had from the Swallowbit Resilience Group is that they have gone to a consultant and that person has given a different view. And we have a view of one person and a view of another person, both who are professional people. And I think that's very different in that. And I think you just said earlier on that WSP was still going off having an analysis of what has been mentioned by the Swallowfield Group. So therefore, I'm uncomfortable at this moment that there's an outstanding issue that hasn't been resolved one way or the other because an alternative has been put forward, an alternative issue has been raised, and we haven't had an answer to that, and I think that's unfair. I don't know whether we are able to defer. Did we actually physically defer last time? I don't think it came to the...
It was withdrawn before it came to committee.
So I'm inclined to ask for deferral to let this issue that was raised to be resolved one way or the other, to clarify for what is a technical issue which none of us around this table are technical enough to know. Therefore we could be making a decision and WSP come back next week and says what the resilience plan said was right, and I would think that that becomes premature, so I am making that suggestion.
All right, we'll see whether we formalise that in a minute. I think, members, let's try and bring some conclusions to this. Normally, in these sort of circumstances, as a committee, we tend to be faced by the council and or the applicant presenting very detailed technical evidence. On one side, and on the other side, residents who don't want something. There is quite a distinction between, and by the way, in those situations, if we back the residents, it goes to appeal and we nearly always lose. So the resident ends up in a worse position than actually if we, because we apply some pretty rigid conditions, planning inspectors frequently don't. But in this circumstance it is slightly different because the residents here have taken the exception move of using getting their own professional opinion. But as we've heard tonight, as is quite often the case with professionals, they don't agree. We're hearing tonight from the planning officers concerned and from WSP that there is a greater amount of information that's been made available, and therefore we've been told that the WSP report is more thorough. I'm not in a position to confirm whether that is indeed or not the case, but we as a committee are advised by professional planning officers and internal consultants such as WSP, and we're getting quite clear guidance on that. I know that is contrary to what I'm sure many of the residents from Swallowfield want to hear. I'm not expressing an opinion, I'm expressing what is in fact a fact. Now, Claire has used the term imbalance in what she said, but I believe that what we've heard tonight is that the proposals from Thames Water will address the issue, and we've heard quite clearly that the proposals to minimise the risk of flooding and avoid exacerbating a pre-existing position will not be made any worse by this development. And that is the basis on which we need to judge it. Now, Lindsay, you said you're very uncomfortable with it. Are you wanting to make a proposal to substantiate it?
Yes, I will make a proposal to defer on the grounds that there's still outstanding information that's been presented by the Swallowfield Resilience Group expert, and that has not been finalised by WSP.
Okay, I'm going to seek some. You'll second it. Well, before we take the vote, let's just get some clarity on that.
Chairman, if I can, members, if I can refer you to the update sheet, and it's the section which was an appendix, and it's appendix 1. It says on there Willow Street Works emails and letters from WSP. Okay, then just appendix 1. So it's got planning committee, 1st of April, members update, appendix 1. Within that, there is a letter moving through. I know that they're not. It's towards the back. Does it say Willow Street Works in it?
Three different appendices.
Right, if you move through towards the back, you'll see there's a letter dated 30th of March from WSP. And that letter is a direct response to the comments raised by the consultant for the resilience group, and it is responding to each of the concerns that were raised by that consultant. I think maybe the best thing to do would be if I could just briefly ask Martin to just quickly summarise the points that are set out in that letter.
Well, I remember in summary, as I said before, that his conclusion is that he can't make any comment because he hasn't reviewed the information, and so he's not against it. The main point he does make, apart from that, is about calibration. The residents very recently provided 3 levels for a particular event, which is useful, but you can't calibrate a model without flow data. Even river models are often not calibrated.
Which he? You said him or they? Who are you talking about?
I think that he is the expert that's been employed on behalf of the local residents.
Sorry, our letter was reviewing that submission, and the main point he makes is that the model isn't calibrated. We did use that information as a surrogate in trying to produce one of the events that gave similar levels, but it's not actual calibration because you haven't got flow data and level data which to check, run a model against a particular event. And that's very common, this sort of model. Even for river models, you don't necessarily have it. And the EA model for the River Loddon didn't have that accurate calibration until relatively recently.
Okay, maybe if I could just clarify one thing, if you wouldn't mind, and just agreeing or disagreeing with me. Are you satisfied that in the event that this is deferred, that you would not be able to provide any further advice over and above what you've already provided in respect of that comment from those from the residents' consultants? Is there anything else that you feel would be achieved, or any further information you could gather, or further information you could provide that could be gained from a deferral?
No, not that we could do. I mean, obviously the big